Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We are going to be having a great in-depth discussion, and we will be discussing the state of Black housing in Arizona. My name is Serena Unrein, and I'm with the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities. And about once a quarter, we get together to discuss topics that are important to healthy communities, to share best practices, data, and policies to improve community health. We are joined today by our co-hosts at State of Black Arizona. They are going to be releasing their new report about state of Black housing in Arizona tomorrow. So we are all going to get a sneak preview, hear from the report authors, and learn more about this important topic. So a few things to note before we get started with our conversation shortly. You could see us, but we cannot see you. But even though you aren't on camera, you are a key part of today's conversation. We'll be starting with a presentation about the report. And as we go through this presentation and hear about the data, please feel free to share your questions, and we will shortly after the presentation get into a conversation. And we definitely want to get to a lot of audience questions. So as you have questions come up, please feel free to type them in the chat or type them into the Q&A. We also will be recording this webinar and sending out a link of the recording to everyone who registered for this webinar. Along with the recording, we will be sending a link where you can access the State of Black Housing report. And we will be including any links referenced by our speakers in that follow-up email as well. So once again, because we've had a few people join us, and if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us who you are and where you're joining us from, we would love to know who all is in the audience today. But again, we can see you, or you can see us, but we cannot see you. And you are a key part of our conversation. So please feel free to chime in, have anything that you want to say included in the chat today, and let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. So without any further delay, we are going to start and get into this conversation. And I am going to introduce our panelists today and give you a little bit of their background, and then I will hand it over. So first, we are joined by Taniqua Broughton. She is a seasoned nonprofit leader with over 25 years of experience driving organizational growth and fostering transformational leadership. As CEO of the State of Black Arizona, she has championed initiatives that empower underrepresented communities and strengthen partnerships. Through SBAZ's African American Leadership Institute, she has successfully equipped leaders in Phoenix and Southern Arizona to address systemic changes and drive meaningful change. Taniqua holds advanced degrees from Arizona State University and a certification in nonprofit leadership and management. And we are also joined by the report authors. Drew Callow is a research consultant specializing in organizational data management and analysis, data systems development, research strategy, program evaluation, impact analysis, and data-driven content creation. His work spans the private and nonprofit sectors, academia, and local government. He holds a bachelor's degree in biology from Wichita State University and a master of public administration from Arizona State University. And Dr. Maria Willis is a higher education leader, researcher, and data strategist with more than 17 years of experience in strategic planning, institutional research, and data analytics. She holds a Bachelor of Science in International Business from Arizona State University's W.P. Carey School of Business, a Master of Education, and a doctorate in Educational Leadership and Policy from the University of Arizona. As Senior Director of Data Analytics at Arizona State University, she leads the development of reporting solutions, analytic frameworks, and data-informed strategies that support institutional decision-making. We are so glad to have all of you with us today. We feel excited to learn this information that is included in this report. So I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Taniqua Broughton.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for putting what organization you work with and the service that you provide to others in the community. We are excited on behalf of our board of directors, as well as our chair, Darnika Rowley. We look forward to sharing the State of Black Housing Report. Serena, if you can go ahead and put up the slides, I'm going to take you on a journey before I pass it off to Dr. Willis and Drew Callow.
Just one second.
Thank you for continuing to put your name and information. Hi, Allison. Thanks for joining us. A friend indeed. Well, Serena, thank you for those opening remarks, as well as the support for hosting this very important conversation. I want to start my remarks off with a community-informed perspective that we are sharing in the report. Homeownership in Arizona feels so out of reach. In order to afford a home, you have to move way out to the outskirts. People I know have beautiful homes, but they also have to work multiple jobs or commute 2 hours into Phoenix just to maintain it. So think about that statement. That might be your current scenario, or maybe someone you know who purchased a home. Or, that's far from your experience, and home ownership has provided you a whole different path. Either way, today, with great gratitude and a profound sense of urgency, we are proud to share a sneak preview of the State of Black Housing Report. That statement that I shares the challenges around affordability constraints, market pressures, trust and information gaps, fatigue, and the need for support. In observance of National Home Ownership Month, the state of Black Arizona is addressing the widening Arizona housing market trends and systemic disparities informed by a labor of love, vigorous research, and community truth-telling. The state of Black Arizona is committed to disaggregating data that reveals truths, challenges, and highlights opportunities to address disparities that impact the state's Black community. Before I share with you more about our why and the vision for the report, I want to ask you a simple question. Serena, can you put that question up? We want you to actively participate in a polling question. And as that comes on screen, the question is, what is considered the primary source of wealth building for most American families? All right. So we may be having a few technical difficulties with our polling. So I'm going to give you the question. I'm going to give you the question again and then ask you in the chat box to give me what you believe is the answer. What is considered the primary source of wealth building for most American families? A, retirement accounts, B, stocks, C, home ownership, or D, savings account. So put in the chat what you believe the answer is. Retirement accounts, stocks, home ownership, or savings accounts. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for your participation. The answer is C, home ownership. So just keep that answer in the back of your thoughts as we move through the data today. You will see some intersections or connections, even some challenges as to why some of our story and our historical challenges have brought us to maybe not being where we need to be as Black Arizonans when it comes to home ownership. So I want to share with you, we began this research journey about 2.5 years ago, and it began with a steering committee of experts to answer a problem statement. So from 2018 to 2021, there were some improvements across all demographics, but not enough to address the inequities seen in ownership rates. Record low interest rates and relatively low housing costs have evaporated, leaving the situation even more difficult for a median wage household in Arizona. As a collective, we decided to work together to work with leaders and real estate, finance, and other related sectors to identify actionable long-term strategies that would improve homeownership rates for Black Arizonans. While that statement of action is still at play and it's evolved a bit in the years, we're finding pathways for Black residents to achieve home ownership is really our central focus. There are many organizations, some that are on today, that have been working to address housing efforts when it emphasizes maybe affordability, homelessness, and even land development. This report really applies a distinct lens. It focuses on the intersection of race, policy, and place, centering the experiences of Black Arizonans rather than relying solely on statewide averages and generalized trends. In doing so, it underscores how systemic barriers such as redlining, discriminatory lending, and unequal economic opportunities continue to shape housing outcomes. The inclusiveness of community-informed perspectives ensures that the analysis both reflect empirical data and the realities that are faced by residents. So this is vital research, and it's validated by what many in our community feel every day, even those who are homeowners. Black home ownership in Arizona remains in crisis. Let me say that again. Black home ownership in Arizona remains in crisis. Our vision is simple: a housing system where Black Arizonans have equitable access to safe, affordable, and stable housing across all neighborhoods. Our report provides a comprehensive examination of housing conditions, access, and disparities affecting Black residents across the state. While 67.54%, of households statewide are owner occupied, only 39.5% of Black residents are homeowners. That's a gap of nearly 28 percent points, driving a deep disparity in family net worth and a staggering reality where nearly almost 1 in 4 Black applicants are denied mortgage financing. So as you hear and see the data today and read the report in the coming days, we ask for you to think differently about what you hear and see. We want you to remain curious and consider responding to the data and the community perspectives in a different manner. I'm asking you to avoid just using information that you've gathered from voices in the community or performing a transaction of gathering people who cannot truly impact the necessary changes needed, but to consider how an intentional and targeted strategy, policy, practice, or program implementation can result in decreasing that 28% gap. Our recommendations are not a prescribed roadmap, and nor are they a step-by-step approach, but a request to collectively work to change the trajectory of this report. We use culture to make sense of data, transforming numbers into meaning and action. However, our sense-making can only change with the integration of housing experts, policymakers, government units, and community action action partners who can enact change by working together. We look forward to what we can do together versus what we can do alone. Hopefully, you heard my words, it hit your heart. I am pleased to introduce to you Drew Callow and Dr. Maria Willis, our analyst and writer, who will share our landmark report.
Thank you for that, Taniqua, on there. And before we get started, I wanted to begin with walking you through the framework of the report and the structure of today's presentation. Understanding how the report is organized will help kind of bring context to the findings and the recommendations. So the report will begin with examining Black homeownership in Arizona, tracing key policies, practices, and events, and also including racial covenant, redlining, and the Great Recession. This historical timeline will provide a foundation for understanding the disparities we see presently. After that, the report will kind of go into a snapshot of the current state of Black housing in Arizona, using data to examine things from our homeownership rate, housing affordability, wealth disparity, housing cost burden, and access to mortgage financing. Together, these indicators will help us illustrate the economic reality facing Black households across Arizona. The report also incorporates community voice through the survey findings and also the lived experiences shared by Black Arizonas. These perspectives kind of add context to the data, highlighting some of the challenges, aspirations, the barriers of individuals will encounter navigating the housing market. Finally, we will conclude with some recommendations designed to expand access to homeownership, strengthening housing stability, and also supporting long-term wealth development for Black communities in Arizona. Today's presentation will follow that same framework, and we'll briefly touch on each of those topics, just for the sake of time, right? Today that we have you here and to maximize that. While we will highlight some of the key findings and themes and recommendations, we also encourage you to read the full report to have a more comprehensive understanding. To the next slide.
All right. We'll just jump right in. Yeah, so I don't think I have to answer any question. I think you all know the answer to why does homeownership matter? Pretty sure everybody on the call has an idea of what that means. But just for some context, homeownership obviously has become one of the most pressing issues in the U.S. over the last, call it a decade, especially through post-COVID. Decreased access to affordable housing coincides and contributes to rising inequality, alongside stagnant wages and decreased economic mobility for millions of families in the U.S. Housing affordability issues are not isolated to a handful of key growing metros or coastal metropolises. They're impacting communities of all sizes across every corner of this country. This is a problem because in times of economic hardship, which we were all familiar with, housing has historically been a buffer, offering a bit of added stability, mobility, and optionality, which is critical. Having options to help you survive challenging situations. Real estate ownership is a key mechanism for building generational wealth and stability, and it always has been. Stable housing increases resilience to these economic shocks, reduces risk of displacement, uprooting of families, especially children. Having housing stability allows families to find roots within their local communities, build long-term social networks, which are also just as critical to social and economic success, is having a strong network. It's difficult to have that if you're being uprooted because of housing insecurity. And ultimately, homeownership facilitates economic mobility, functioning as both a financial asset and a stabilizing force that improves long-term economic trajectories. Access to housing has never been equitable. The effects of historic structural inequalities, while those structures may not be in place today, the effects of those policies and decisions can still be felt today and can still be seen in the data. Black households in Arizona experience lower rates of homeownerships, higher housing cost burdens, and they also have significantly less wealth than their peers. And as you can see here, this first chart, this is household owner occupancy rates. So the way we're measuring this just moving forward, when we say home ownership, what we're doing is we're looking at all occupied households as measured by the census and the ACF surveys. And then we're looking at what percent of those households are owner occupied as opposed to renter occupied or unoccupied. So you can see here in the United States and Arizona, we have that broken down by key racial and ethnic demographics. And as you can see in Arizona, roughly 63% or I'm sorry, 67% of total households in the state are owner occupied, which is roughly on par with the statewide or the national average of 65%. However, you can see there's significant disparities when you look at white versus Hispanic and Latino and Black households. Those disparities are pretty stark here in Arizona, where even the owner occupancy rate of Black households in Arizona is less than 40%, compared to 73% of white households. And they're even underperforming their national peers. If you look across the entire country, roughly 44% of all Black households are owner occupied. So we're underperforming even relative to our national peers in this sense. Um, to understand oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead, Maria, before I jump into the next thing.
Thank you for that. The next slide, Serena, on there. So Drew kind of showed the data there. So how do we get there, right? To understand the state of Black home ownership in Arizona today, we first need to understand the policies and practices that shape it, right? We didn't get here by accident on there. The disparities that we see in home ownership and wealth didn't happen by chance. They are results of decades of policies, private practice, and institutional decisions that limited where Black families could live, access credit, and build wealth. One of the earliest tools that we used to enforce segregation was racial covenant. Figure 2 shows this, right? It shows an example of a protective covenant, which was a restriction written directly into property deeds. These covenants prohibited homeowners' homes from being sold, rented, occupied by African American or other racial, ethnic, or religious minorities. Beginning in the 1900s, racial covenant became common throughout the country. Developer, homeowners association, and the local government use these to maintain segregated neighborhood, excluding Black families from some of the newest and most desirable communities on there. Right? And we get to looking at the history of Arizona, right? Figure 3 shows that racial restrictive covenant from Maricopa County home deed in 1948. This restriction were not isolated incidents, right? They were part of a broader system that determined who could access home ownership and the wealth opportunities that came with it. Although racial covenant became unenforceable through the Fair Housing Act in 1968, their impact on neighborhood development and wealth accumulation is still felt today on there. Next slide, Serena. Um, while racial covenant operated at a local level, discrimination in housing also reinforced through federal policies through practices known as redlining. In 1930s on there, the Federal Housing Administration on there and the Homeowners Loan Corporation developed a color-coded map that guided mortgage lending and investment decisions. Neighborhoods were rated based on their perceived risks, right? And most of that was rating was often heavily influenced by race. Communities where Black residents were frequently labeled as hazardous and outlined in red on the federal map. As a result, families living in these neighborhoods were often denied access to federally backed mortgages, affordable credit, regardless of their individual qualifications. So what we see here in figure 4 shows a redlining map of Phoenix in 1935, area stretching from Van Buren Street to the Salt River that many of us are familiar with, right? They were designated as D-graded neighborhoods, the lowest possible rating. Residents in these neighborhoods and communities on here were effectively cut off from many of the financial resources that had provided home ownership opportunities on there. At the same time, predominantly white neighborhoods received substantial financial investments, making it easier for residents to purchase home, build equity, and accumulate wealth. Together, racial covenant and redlining created a system that limited opportunity for Black families while creating pathways for wealth for others. The effects of these policies are still seen today in patterns of home ownership, neighborhood investments, but also in wealth disparities that we'll see later in there. The next slide, please, Serena. And even after the fair housing protections were enacted, barriers for Black homeownership persistence, right? So now we're looking at the 2008 housing crisis that added another layer of this history of inequity. So in many cases, the communities that had been historically denied access to credit was then later targeted for the most predatory form of lending, right? In the years leading up to the crash, lenders increasingly promoted the subprime mortgages, right? Loans with higher interest rate and greater financial risk. While these loans were marketed as expanding access to home ownership, they disproportionately affected Black borrowers on there. As we see in Figure 5, by the 2006, approximately 53% of Black home buyers nationwide were using subprime mortgage products, nearly double that of white home buyers. This meant that Black families entered in the housing market with riskier and more expensive lending terms. When the market then collapsed, Arizona had become one of the nation's foreclosure hotspots. Communities throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area, including like South Phoenix, Maryville, Lavine, Buckeye, experienced significant foreclosures and decline in home prices. For many Black families, home ownership was expected to be a path for stability and wealth. Instead, the crisis resulted in a loss in equity, foreclosure, damaged credit, and significant financial setbacks on there. Nationally, Black households experienced the largest wealth losses during the Great Recession. So, this cycle of exclusion followed by unequal inclusion created and shaped home ownership on their wealth development, economic opportunities for Black families that we still see today on there. The next one, Serena. So before we go into that, I think one of the important things to note before we look into the data is acknowledging another challenge that faces Black communities in Arizona, and that's visibility, right? Black residents in Arizona make up less than 5% of Arizona's population. And because of this, Black communities are often underrepresented in statewide data sets. And in some cases, the sample sizes are too small to be considered statistically significant. Sorry. And when we missing from the data or when it is limited, the specific experiences and needs of Black Arizonans then become invisible in policy and decision making. It makes it more difficult to advocate for the targeted investment and resources needed to address these long-standing disparities. So one of the goals of this report is to help bring some visibility, right, to close that gap on there. The data that we are about to review provides a clearer picture of the housing, economic, wealth development challenges facing Black communities across Arizona. It's also designed to help us to better understand how these historical barriers have shaped the opportunities and outcomes today. Next one, Torian.
All right. So let's jump into the data, my favorite part. First, we'll talk about pricing. Anybody that lives in Arizona knows that housing has become very expensive here over the last 10 years. Residential construction, post Great Recession just absolutely dropped off the face of the planet, especially in Arizona markets as being one of the hardest hit markets when the real estate bubble popped. And we really never caught back up with our construction, especially as our population continued to grow at an accelerated rate. So basically, we have a classic supply and demand issue. We have a supply that is rapidly outpaced by growing demand. We have a substantial shortage of affordable housing across a wide range of income levels. Virtually everybody, regardless, looking for a starter home or their giant McMansion is it's a tough market out there. So as you can see here, these are typical home values as measured by the Zillow Home Value Index, it's a pretty straightforward index to understand. But you'll see in all key markets and the U.S., those home prices have risen. We have outpacing the national average in pretty much every major market here, particularly Flagstaff and Phoenix. The Phoenix metro area, the median home value had doubled between 2012 and 23. We've seen a little bit of that come down as interest rates go up and there's market adjustments and things like that. But the median house price still sits between $400,000 and $450,000, that's really expensive when you look at household median wages. Rents have followed a similar upward trend, with Arizona ranking as among the fastest growing states for rent increases as well. Between just 2021 and 2023, post COVID, rents increased by between 40 and 60%, which far outpaced any sort of income growth that we saw with inflation and the tight job market that benefited a lot of us. But unfortunately, the cost of living just kept rising as well. You can go to the next slide, Serena. Thank you. Household incomes is what you're looking at here. This is median household income for Arizona and the United States, broken down by the total as well as white, Hispanic, Latino, and Black households. So you can see nationally, the median household income for Black and African American households is roughly $55,000. That's about 32% lower than the national total median of $80,000. In Arizona, that median is 63,000. So we're performing a little better in that metric relative to our national counterparts, but still significantly below the total household income of about 80,000. So we've seen these seem I don't know, minuscule, I guess, if you're not super familiar with these metrics. But this is pretty drastic. I mean, a 20% difference in annual income, that's a huge hit to your ability to save, your ability for disposable income, to manage your finances in times of a crisis. We've all heard the stats about how many less than 50% of households can afford a $5,000 emergency. So these differences are pretty stark, especially as they compound year over year. And we did see wages rise significantly in recent years. Post COVID, labor market was super tight. We saw some good growth benefiting workers, but those gains were largely offset by the rising inflation that happened in the same period. And for example, median hourly wages grew by roughly 21% here between 2020 and 2024. That's significant. That's really significant. However, inflation grew by 22% in that same 4-year period. So the gains that we were getting, you couldn't really feel them. And that was, I think, all these families, myself included, say, boy, on paper it seems like we're doing really good, but it does not feel like it. And so that imbalance between rising housing costs and relatively stagnant wage growth just continues to place increasing pressure on housing stability. And according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, a minimum wage worker, and again, the minimum wage hasn't risen from 725 in like 15 years when I was a minimum wage worker in high school. To a minimum wage worker in Arizona would need to work roughly 93 hours per week to afford a modest 2-bedroom rental at the current fair market rates. And these pressures, Black and minority households are increasingly affected, more so than their peers in this sense. They're more likely to face these income and wealth constraints that really put pressure on their ability to have stable housing. And the next slide, I'll hand it off to Maria.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And before I go into the total assets, I kind of want to discuss like the net worth. So to understand the disparities in Black households, we need to examine the economic conditions that influences, right, access to home ownership. Home ownership is not like just determined, right, by the income alone on it. It's also shaped by families, wealth, their assets, their debts. And together that determines if a family can purchase and sustain a home, which is important as well over time. So before I get into like the total asset, I want to kind of look at the net worth, which isn't represented here on there. So the net worth of a household is basically everything a family owns minus everything, it owes on there. So it is basically their total assets minus their total debt equal the net worth there on there. When we're looking at that for Arizona, the median net worth of Black households is approximately $11,700, right? On there. And that in itself is 93% less than the state average on there, but also 53% less than Black Americans, right? So other Americans outside of Arizona. So then we get into why that is on here. And then we see in figure 9, which you see here on the screen, which is the total assets on there, which includes savings, retirement accounts, investments, business, home equity, the assets that are important to provide financial stability and to help families build wealth on there. So what we see here in Arizona here is that we see the for Black households it is $26,000, and then we see for Black Americans it's $52,000 on there. So we can see that those stagnant differences there that highlights the challenges that Black families face in building wealth and also just transferring that wealth from generations. Next slide. And another aspect of that is looking at, their debt. So finally, figure 10 kind of examines debt. Debt in itself is not necessarily negative. It In fact, mortgages and other investments can help family build wealth right on there. So it's not inherently negative either. However, when families have limited assets and savings on there, even modest debt can become a barrier to a home ownership and financial stability on here. So while we see that Black Arizonas and Black Americans have less debt, they also have less assets as well. So taken together, this findings kind of show that Black households in Arizona, while they have less debt, they also are operating on a much smaller financial scale with fewer resources on their low levels of accumulated wealth and less financial cushion to navigate the housing market. Next slide, Sam.
There we go. Yeah, so what you're looking at here is this is how we measure housing burden. So basically, a household is considered housing burdened if they are spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing, whether that be rent or a mortgage, and their utility costs, just to live and inhabit a physical structure that provides safety and comfort. So you can see here, we also have severely housing burdened, which is families or households that are paying 50% or more of their gross income on housing. And these figures are really, really staggering. Black households in Arizona face persistent disparities across, all these key housing indicators, including, low home ownership rates, or mortgage denials, but also housing cost burdens. And they all compound to just really, really make housing affordability a real challenge for a lot of families. The latest census data shows that Black renters are like shockingly highly affected relative to their peers. Almost 50% of Black Arizonans are considered housing burden, compared to white households that were less than 30%. And what's worse is almost a quarter of Black households in Arizona are considered severely house burdened. Again, meaning almost a quarter of Black households are paying almost 50%. 50% or more of their gross income on housing, on their rent, on their utilities, on their mortgage, what have you. In looking at if you zoom out nationally, census data from 2023 shows that roughly 56% of Black renter households, which is about 4.6 million families, were considered housing burdened, paying 30% or more. So as sad as it is to say, the Black households in Arizona are outperforming their national counterparts just by a few percentage points. We're at least under 50% housing burdened. So, woo, that's exciting. But still, these numbers are really, really upsetting. And I will say, I put the wrong graph on here. So if you look at the American Indian Alaska Native, the graph scale is correct, but the figures are not. That's actually 24% are considered housing burdened, and 12.5% are considered severely housing burdened. So forgive my oversight there. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. We broke the data out by county level just to get a little more nuance into it. We're talking about state a lot, but Arizona is unique to relative to a lot of other markets that we typically get compared to, where 75% of the population lives in 2 counties. And that causes some unique challenges to data analysts looking at Arizona, where like rural communities or even Flagstaff and Yuma, they're often overlooked when talking about statewide aggregated statistics. It's a challenge to have everybody feel well represented, as Maria discussed earlier. But we have everything broken down by county to give you an idea of where things stand. Again, we're looking at total occupied housing units, and then the percent of those units that are owner occupied. And then you can see the same for Black occupied housing and what percent of them are owner occupied. So interestingly enough, some of the more rural counties that have, a smaller but sizable Black American population are actually doing pretty well on their on home ownership rates. Santa Cruz is interesting. There's apparently 15 Black households there, and they are all homeowners, which is pretty exciting. And again, I want to caveat this, like, we're working with a very limited data sets, small sample sizes. So these figures, especially in the rural communities, are not super robust, but hey, you work with what you got. But as you can see, I mean, the 80% of Black Arizonans live in Maricopa and Pinal counties, and that's where that makes sense. That's where a lot of the population is. That's where a lot of the growth is. So you'll see, Pinal County Black resident homeowners or owner occupied Black residents 75%, which is fantastic. Still under the countywide figure of 80%. But we're seeing success in some of these areas. And again, we want to showcase that there are communities out there that are thriving. There are communities out there that are often overlooked or not considered when we kind of speak in the aggregate. So if you want to see more about this, definitely read the report. It's got a little more detail in the breakdown here, but
Hey,
some
Drew,
interesting
can
stuff.
you give some clarification around what household demographics means, the clarity around single parent, either single adult, two parent, and or dual income to
Oh
this?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can slice this data. We kept it very high level. But yeah, the census data tracks households by, family occupied, are they single parent households? Do they have one or more children or residents under the age of 18? There's a lot of ways that they slice the data that's really interesting. And you'll see I guess disparities is one. You'll see differences in a two-person household with no kids versus a two-parent household or a one-parent household that has two kids under the age of 15. Um, I don't know how many of you have kids, but having kids is expensive and it also reduces your ability to earn. So you'll see some pretty stark disparities when you start slicing along those lines. And again, that's a challenge too, because housing stability is especially important for children, having a safe, stable environment to build social networks, to feel comfortable, to feel safe. And those are often the households that need the most help and that are struggling the most. Did that help, Taniqua?
We will
Uh,
find out shortly.
and then next slide, please. So the other big piece is, oh, sorry, go back up one. There we go. So the other big piece we looked at was mortgage denial rates across various demographies. We looked at I forget the acronym, but you can look at publicly available mortgage data sets year by year. This is the most recent data we have from 2024, and it does show some disparities in mortgage application denial rates. Black applicants continue to be denied at higher rates than their peers. So you'll see that the total mortgage application denial rate in Arizona in 2024 was about a little over 15%. That was about almost 30% for Native American applicants, almost 25% for Black applicants. So there again, we're seeing what I think we're seeing here is remnants of structural inequity playing out in that continue to play out in real time here. While there's no current FHA policy saying that, oh, you live in a Black neighborhood, we're not going to approve your loan, but there's still some factors affecting the success of prospective and current Black homeowners, and you can see it in the data here. So and unequal access to financing is really a prime example of how the echoes of past policies can still reverberate through our modern society. It's a challenge because especially with housing as expensive it is, you need access to quality low interest credit to build equity and security. So you'll see one thing this does not show is this is only applications that were submitted and rejected by the potential financing institution. So this does not include applications that may have been started and then abandoned, applications that may have been submitted and then withdrawn. So you look at that and there's a bit more nuance to these figures, but we wanted to keep it simple and just show that there are disparities. And you'll see in the survey data that Maria will get into shortly that, yeah, there's not everybody's represented in this data set because the process of buying a house is overwhelming. It's complicated. It requires a lot of institutional knowledge and knowledge of finance that I would argue most Americans just don't have off the cusp. And so, feeling overwhelmed and maybe abandoning hopes of ever owning a home are, critical outcomes that can be felt by, historical policies around housing. But I'll pass it over to Maria.
Perfect. Thank you, Drew, on
Hey,
there.
Maria,
Yes.
and Drew, I don't remember. Did we look at any data around down payment assistance?
And
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Someone is just asking specifically around do we have any data around that? I don't recall us looking at that, but I just wanted to double check.
okay.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead, Maria.
No, I was going to say, I would want more about down payment assistance. Like, what did they help them? Did they maintain a home on there? Did it increase home ownerships? Like, what questions about down payment assistance are they looking to answer?
And I will say the data set that we use to aggregate this mortgage data, it's a massive data set that has a lot of metrics in it. So there's a lot of, if you're interested to go diving into really, really large CSV files, I encourage you to check it out because there's a lot of really useful information in there. And you might find what you're looking for.
Straight to the next slide. On there. And Drew kind of led into this part on there, right? So a lot of it, we've covered a lot of data and what the trends looks like. And while the data help us understand the trend, it doesn't always tell us how people experience those trends in their everyday life. This is why, like, a key component of the report was listening directly from Black Arizonans. So the state of Black Arizona conducted a community survey to better understand their perspective of like home ownership, housing challenges, and barriers to purchasing a home. So more than 100 individuals participating, sharing both quantitative responses and also personal experiences, Hannah. While the survey is not intended to represent every Black Arizona, right? On there, we have 100 participants on there. And in Arizona, we have about 361,000 Black residents on there. So I want to be clear on that. It's not to represent everyone on there, but it's just to provide some valuable insights to the realities that many face on there, navigating Arizona housing market on there. The next slide, Serena, on there. So in looking at that on there, when we asked them what were their priorities for the long-term success of Black communities in Arizona, affordable housing emerged as one of the top concerns, ranking alongside education and access to livable wages on there. So one of the themes that came up was affordability constraint and market pressure on there. Affordability was by far one of the commonly challenges identified by survey participants. Respondents described the rising housing prices, rising interest rate, and increased competition from out-of-state buyers as a major barrier to purchasing a home. Several of the participants kind of described feeling like they were being priced out of the market, and others noted like student loan debt, stagnant wages, and the rising housing costs made it difficult for them to even qualify for a mortgage on there. I would say Tanika kind of touched on this earlier when she talked about it. But one of the things that emerged on there and what we describe as a phenomena as drive until you qualify, right? In other words, families are often forced to move far away from job centers and established communities in order to find a home, that they can afford. So while it makes home ownership possible, it also comes at a cost of longer commute, increased transportation expenses, weaker connections to communities on there. So on there as well as resources on there. So when we ask specifically for like their barriers to home ownership, like half of those respondents on there also cited the insignificant savings, right? On there. So we had that down payment question come up. So on there, half of the respondents cited that the insignificant savings for a down payment on there as well on there. The next thing that came up on there, the next slide, Serena, on there, was the systemic barriers and trust gap. Beyond like affordability, respondents also had expressed concerns about like fairness and transparency in the housing process on there. Many of them described the challenges of navigating, mortgage requirements and qualifying standards, while others kind of raised concerns about discriminatory treatments in lending, housing, and maintaining the services, home maintenance services after owning a home, on there, like such as appraisals on there if they went to go sell their home. These experiences contributed to a broader, what we call like a trust gap. Some respondents on there, the issue was not simply whether or not they could buy a home, but whether the system would provide equitable opportunities and outcome once they became a homeowner. Another thing that came up was the financial pressure and information gap on there. Another reoccurring theme of like the emotional toll it took in the home buying process on there. Participants described feeling overwhelmed and shifting requirements, financial pressures, and uncertainty about where that they can find reliable and trusted information sources on there. Some expressed the frustration with the complexity of the process, while they also felt discouraged by after having like repeated setbacks on there, right? So like home ownership feels just out of reach for them. Importantly, these responses did not just reflect like the lack of interest in their home ownership, but rather it was kind of like a loss in confidence in their ability to navigate the system that made them feel complex and inaccessible to them. So many of the respondents kind of emphasize the, trust, centralized resources that can help families better understand the available programs, financial opportunities, and pathways to home ownership. So overall, the survey findings kind of revealed that communities had a strong value in home ownership and recognized it as a pathway to stability and wealth development. However, that aspiration kind of was constrained by affordability challenges, limited access to capitals, concerns about discriminations, and gaps in information and support. The next slide, sorry. We kind of covered that one. The next one. Perfect. The next one. Because those are some of the direct quotes from others. So then we go into, after that survey, some of the recommendations.
That's me. All right. So we'll run through this pretty quickly just because we're running tight on time. But yeah, here's are the recommendations that we've outlined in the report. Read the report. They're in much greater detail. A lot of these make sense. We kept it pretty high level. Again, we're not proposing a roadmap, but we're just identifying opportunities at a high level. There's a lot of great organizations already doing great work in this space that need support. So yeah, first, expand culturally responsive financial education and wealth building resources. Homebuyer programs, financial education, financial literacy programs to meet the specific needs and experiences of Black communities, to kind of meet them where they are. As we talk increasingly in the education space, you got to meet students where they are. You got to be flexible and address the unique needs of communities. So beyond financial general literacy, we're talking about addressing current ongoing barriers to homeownership, including limited access to credit, higher debt burdens, challenges to navigating the home buying process. This is all part of the education that would be critically beneficial. How do we improve the success rate of mortgage applications? How do you make people bankable? How do you make businesses bankable? To channel my inner Robin Reed, former CEO of the Black Chamber. How do you make them bankable? How do you help them be in the position for success? So this includes education on heirs property, estate planning, transfer of assets and wealth across generations, making sure your legal documentations, titling, wills, succession planning, all this stuff is being considered when attempting to build wealth, to build an estate for you and your family. Increase access to capital, reduce financial barriers to homeownership. Pretty straightforward. Reducing financial barriers to homeownership for Black households, particularly in high-cost housing markets like Arizona and Phoenix, is a big challenge. One way you may be able to do this is increase the availability and reach of down payment assistance programs, as someone in the chat mentioned. Other financial supports include, other ways you can assist with the significant upfront costs, closing costs, realtor fees, et cetera, et cetera. These are especially challenging to navigate for first-time homebuyers because it's a system that most people don't understand. Most people don't know what escrow means. So you can get on a policy level, policies that strengthen equitable lending practices, expand access to affordable and responsible credit, loan. How do you craft policies that help with loan approval rates, interest terms, underwriting practices to make sure that there's true equity across markets and across populations. Advanced economic mobility through income growth, workforce development, and education. This is all music to the ears of economic development specialists and anybody that works in the space. Increased economic mobility through education and quality job opportunities makes a lot of sense. And there's always a lot of work to be done in this space. Critically, access to affordable, high quality post-secondary education, job training, new alternative pathways outside of traditional degree programs, which are still wonderful, depending on what you want to do. But trade programs, all the buzzwords about workforce training, super critical for helping underserved populations. So having systems and programs in place that help funnel people, make them aware of these opportunities, and get them boots on the ground and in the market as quickly as possible. Support and strengthen existing action partners. Again, there's already a ton of great organizations doing wonderful work in the space. Many of them are here today, and I want to thank you again for being here because we really appreciate your hard work. But I mean, I can't name them all, but the Greater Phoenix Urban League, Arizona Realtist Group, Family Housing Resources in Tucson, Habitat for Humanity, Rehoboth Community Development Corporations, all the community development CDCs out there, Primavera Foundation, Trellis, Community Coalition for Prosperity, Chicanos por la Casa, all these organizations. They're all doing really great work, and however we can help them and be supportive and potentially collaborate in a coalition sense to pool and expand access. And that's it. Do we have time for questions?
I was going to say, Serena, if we can, if everybody saw on screen, we will release the report tomorrow morning. So yeah, you got to sit just a little bit to wait. But if you sign up for our newsletter, if you didn't get a chance, you can go on our website on the homepage at the bottom. You can click on the newsletter and sign up. And so as soon as we release the report with the landing page, you should get that tomorrow morning. So we want to engage you. We want a coalition build with you. But most importantly, we want to change the trajectory of home ownership in Arizona. So Serena, let's try to use our last bit of time to maybe answer some questions.
That would be great. I thank you all for sharing this data and getting a sneak peek of the report. I know there are a couple of questions in the chat, so we will get to those in just a second. I wanted to start with the question that we'd all discussed before about the differences in Arizona. And Drew, I'd love to get your insight on what you saw that was unique to Arizona. And you're on mute right now.
Sorry about that. Thank you. We've only been doing this for 6 years. There's a lot of Arizona's very unique in a lot of ways. Not necessarily unique. There's other states in similar situations, but Arizona specifically, again, data availability is always a struggle because Black and African Arizonans make up about 5% of the population here in the state, which is small compared to 13, I think almost 14% of the national population is Black or African American. So it's an undersized is the wrong word, but it's an often overlooked community here in Arizona because of its size. And again, because so much of Arizona is concentrated in like a handful of very large communities, we have relatively robust data on those communities here in Maricopa County and Pinal County and Pima County, less so about Mojave County and Navajo County, but there's people there that we want to make sure that we're not overlooking. And Arizona is a unique market too, because, for the last 10, 20 years, we were the affordable market, a lot of growth, affordable housing, growing jobs. But however, that's no longer the case. We're no longer affordable, and those wages haven't kept up because we were affordable because there was labor arbitration, backhaul centers, et cetera, that were inexpensive. Chicago or New York markets could get vastly cheaper real estate and vastly cheaper workers here. But as the cost of living and the cost of everything rose, those wages did not keep up. And so there are some unique challenges to Arizona.
Thanks, Drew. And I really appreciate you pointing out that until recently, Arizona was considered an affordable place to live, and that's changed dramatically recently. So that, really impacts the massive structural inequalities that are already in existence. Maria, I saw you on mute. So if you want to, I don't know if you want to hop in, but I want you to have a chance to share.
No, I'm good on that question, Serena. No.
Okay. I wanted to go to some of the audience questions here. And I know we talked a little bit about the down payment assistance live, but I see that there is a question from April about any predictions that you all might have about how expanding access for individual borrowers via education, economic mobility, and access to capital, and how that may increase competition in the market when borrowers are already experiencing inventory constraints. And I don't know if either of you or if any of you have any thoughts on that. That's a complex question.
Yeah, Maria, feel free to cut me off, but yeah, I mean, again, there's there is at the base of all of this is a classic supply and demand issue. There's high demand, there's low supply. So yeah, in a sense, if we can kind of upskill or make more financially competitive these underserved communities, it does increase demand in already tight markets. However, what it also does is increase economic mobility at the individual or family level, and it gives them the option that maybe if they can't find something here, maybe there's another market that they can now afford, because they're better financially positioned. Maybe there's growing markets in another area in the Sun Belt, because right now the Sun Belt's where all the growth is happening. That's where all the migration is. And so it increases economic mobility. It increases, again, optionality. You have choices when you have good education, you have marketable skills in the labor market, and you have a financial cushion that gives you optionality to make decisions based on what's best for you and your family, which a lot of people don't have that. If you don't have income, you can't afford to move, you can't afford to leave your job, even if it's a low paying job. Like these are challenges that millions of people face. Did that answer the question?
Yes, I think you did a great job answering that question. We have another question from Maggie, and I think this is a really important one to get to, and especially because the report focuses so much on home ownership. And Maggie says, I see a lack of emphasis on home ownership in general by our community stakeholders. How do we change the dialogue? And I think in addition to changing the dialogue, if you all had any other insight about why I think you did a nice job of talking about why there's such an emphasis on home ownership, but anything else that you might want to add from your insights on doing this report on home ownership are welcome as well.
I think that, and how do we change the dialogue? I think it is the report kind of sets the tone for the collaboration of that. We hoping like through the data, providing visibility into those things and also research behind, like what Drew opened up with. What does, home ownership offer? Not just, and I think it's important to note that increasing Black home ownership is just not a benefit to Black people, right? It's a benefit to Arizona as a whole, right? We're increasing our tax base on there. We have people that are invested in the communities that they live in there as well. So I think that that's an important narrative as well. Like it's just not a benefit to Black people; it's a benefit to Arizona as a whole, right? On there, and as well as you said, like it brings in, economic mobility. These people now have the ability to send their kids to college, to start businesses, things like that. So I think that changing the narrative about like this is something to help Arizona as a whole is important, and making that visible through the data and the reports that's there. But also, it's not one person that does this work or one organization that does this work. It has to be a collaboration across different sectors in order to achieve this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the conversation goes to like plays off of a sense of almost defeat. Like things have gotten so out of reach from a cost perspective that it's like, well, we're not gonna tackle this issue. We're gonna try and tackle it through adjacent means, or yeah, a holistic approach is fine, but yeah, you got to have pieces implemented for the housing affordability issue as well.
Thank you. I wanted to, Taniqua, if I could put you on the spot, I wanted to ask a question about your vision for what comes next. And this report shows that there are systemic barriers to housing for Black Arizonans, and that it's not just a matter of individual choices. And because these barriers are deeply entrenched in our institutions, policies, and practices, it's not simple to rectify. And I think we just had a question in the Q&A about addressing some of the legacy of redlining and racial covenants. And what, as the leader of state of Black Arizona, what does your vision for housing equity look like? And what are you really hoping results is from this report?
Thank you for that, Serena. And I think that was like three questions in one.
Well, sorry.
So I'm going to try to first tackle it with just some of my initial thoughts to the audience, and then I think share some more maybe potential or tactical things that you as the listener can do. First of all, when we do these reports, we do them to create a baseline and an understanding of what's happening in the ecosystem, whether it's around education, business, and now in housing. And while sometimes the data may look very challenging or depressing, we want it to be an opportunity. And what we want is we want people to stop making decisions on what they don't know, but what they do know, and better strategize and problem solve, because we have spent the time and effort to get the perspective from the community, but also the empirical data. So I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, which the vision is very much simple. It's where Black Arizonans, if they choose, have the ability to have equitable access to safe, affordable, and stable housing across all neighborhoods in Arizona. That they don't have to all go out to Casa Grande or Maricopa or the West Side, or to have to go in corner pockets of Southern Tucson or wherever that may be. I want people to be able to feel like they have the options, and that is the accessibility and affordability of that. I think financial protections, abilities to really build, I think, wealth, and access to credit and mortgage products, I think, are also important. So if you can activate change, we want you to consider doing that change within your wheelhouse. For the embetterment of all Arizonans. I constantly say this, like when we are focusing on everybody, it uplifts the tides for all. So my more specific thoughts, if you want to think about it around maybe um, lending, is what are those benchmarks and metrics? So looking at the parity rates, you heard Dr. Willis and Drew talk about where we were. So if you're looking at serving everyone, how do you look at parity between those investments and resources across the board to make sure that you're getting more people across the finish line? Looking at income to rent ratio targets. Some people told us, a lot of people told us, like, home ownership is just not something right now I want to focus on, but looking at those income to rent rate targets. Looking at also policies that align with housing for broader economic opportunities. So I think some of what Drew talked about is like, if we understand what our economy is, how are we making that alignment? Looking at evictions and protections for, I think, housing in closer to hotspots. So ultimately, I would just say our hope is that you can work more closely with those who are on the ground, those who are in the community, those who are in local government, to create the change. So we want to give you the foundational knowledge, but simply we can't do it alone without everyone coming together and helping to support us.
Thank you. I know that we're close to time here, so I wanted to give each of our panelists a chance to wrap up and share any final thoughts that they might have. And Drew, I'll start with you. So if there's anything that you want to make sure that the audience gets a chance to either learn from things that you didn't have a chance to say, or just final thoughts, the floor is yours.
So many things that I want to say. DM me offline if you want to have a conversation. No, I am first and foremost a data specialist. I wouldn't call myself a subject matter expert in housing. I know, and I know what I know, but there's people that are way smarter about this stuff than I am. But again, data is always the challenge, and the biggest challenge in any data program is finding the data that is valid and accurate and robust enough. So, we make the decisions on resources that we use and things like that, but there's a lot of different ways to look at stuff like this, and it's an ongoing conversation. So really just stay engaged, and communicate with us, communicate with other people doing the work, and please reach out to me or anybody here if you would like to have a further discussion about data in this space. And the other thing is, like, this is a holistic issue. This isn't a Black people problem. This is a everywhere in the country problem. Everybody struggling with housing affordability. It is inequitably impacting communities of color more so than others. And so that is a critical piece, but it's a holistic problem that requires, like, the financial literacy stuff, but it also requires education. It requires community support. It requires all of these solutions have to come together to fix such a systemic problem.
Thanks, Drew. Nice job wrapping a very complex topic up. Dr. Willis, I'll hand it over to you.
I think that when you get to see the report, it has a lot of great data in there and a narrative for Black Arizonans on there, as well as Black Americans, right, on there. So I'm hoping that, like as Tingo said, like this is a long project on there, countless hours went into it. So I'm hoping that the data becomes actionable, right, on there. Like we did the part of getting the data to you, and then on there that data is then used into actionable initiatives that we can see move the needle on there for Black Arizonans.
Thank you. And thank you both for your hard work on the report. And Taniqua, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Yeah, I shared earlier my vision. I shared earlier the need. And I think there are many folks on here who are not just in housing or housing experts or doing the work on the ground. So how can you maybe think about this to figure out how do you see yourself in making improvements or just enacting change in the work? And so what I will say is when I think about this, I think about the social determinants of health. And your zip code can determine a number of factors. And so stable housing interacts with income, healthcare quality, and outcomes, as well as employment, education, and even mental health. So the question is, like, if we're going to do this work, it must be as a collective. And you got to think about in changing those social determinants, how can we do that? And we give incentives for business to come here all the time. How do we give incentives around housing, transportation, and education to bring back to the economic development of the state of Arizona?
That feels like a perfect note to end on for another Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities webinar. Thank you, State of Black Arizona, for partnering with us on this webinar. We're so excited for that report to be released tomorrow. So please make sure that you are signed up for the State of Black Arizona's newsletter so you can get that report. And we'll also link to that along with a link to the report or to today's recording. I want to thank our panelists for being so insightful, for sharing your expertise and insight. And I wanted to thank our audience, as always, for being engaged, for listening, for asking really thoughtful questions. You all make these conversations really worthwhile. And we're looking forward to continuing this discussion. So we'll hope to see you soon. But thank you very much, State of Black Arizona, for your time this morning. And good luck with the report release this week. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.